So I thought it would be a good time to revisit Astrology 101. With Aries season, I like to teach astrology starting with Aries and the first day of Aries season when the sun is at 0 degrees of Aries. So, because I think it's easy to visualize everything and how everything on the chart works. One thing I hardly ever do is talk about like the planets or the nature of each sun sign. So I guess we can start with that. Aries is a cardinal sign. It's a fire sign. And it initiates spring. Aries, I made a video about this, but Aries is known for being like really pushy and loud and immature. I don't really feel like those things are true. Sometimes they are. I know a few Aries like that, but I don't know like a ton of Aries like that. Hi, thanks for the likes. I appreciate that. I think Aries, their biggest strength is to start something new. I always end up going like this, like I'm lighting a match when I talk about Aries. I think it's like the Ace of Wands, right? And their biggest strength is to be able to initiate something. Sometimes Aries don't have the biggest follow through, kind of depends on the chart and the person. But they are always going to be, their strength is always getting something started and getting the ball rolling. They're so self-possessed. That's something that I really admire about them. Aries, Sun, Gemini, Moon, Virgo, Rising. Awesome. That's so cool. And you have Aries on the 12th house. Can you share, is your Sun in Aries? Hi. Sun's in Sagittarius. So we're just talking about Aries as a sign right now. I'm trying to put some things together that I can put on my Astrology 101 playlist. No, you're good. You're good. Thanks. Thank you for the likes. Let me show you. I have it here. Let's see. We're going to talk about Aries in the first house first. So Aries retains those qualities that I talked about regardless of what house it's in. But each house in astrology represents a different part of life. Your sun is an Aries, sun, moon, and rising. Okay, Claire, let's talk about your sun then. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's imagine his birthday might not be today or yesterday or whatever, but let's imagine that his sun and his moon are right at the beginning of Aries. Okay? Because he must have been born right before sunrise for him to be an Aries sun in first house, right? So his sun's someplace in here. This outer wheel, when you look at an astrology chart, it's this outer wheel that moves. Okay? So as the sun rises and sets, it moves around like this. And I have a this took me a really long time to understand in astrology, so this is like a big part of what I try to teach. So like if I have, oh my gosh, there's a hair on it because I just put a bunch of tape over it. If I have it like this, I even have a sun here. I don't know if you can even see it. But the planets are embedded in the 30 degrees of each sign in the ecliptic. And so your progeny, your son, he was born right before sunrise for his sun and his moon to be in first house. But say that he had been born later in the day. You know, the sun, in Placidus, the cusps of each house depend on, it's where the sun will be at every 2 hours. With the MC being where the sun would be at noon. So if he were born at noon, let's say, like a little bit like this, let's say, then he'd be an Aries sun and moon in 9th house, and he might be a Cancer rising. And that would change some of the things in his chart. Each sign has a planetary ruler also. So if he is an Aries sun and moon, then his chart ruler would be Mars. Where's his Mars at, Claire? Do you know where Mars is at in your boy's chart? Because Mars will be the ruler of that chart. And depending on where Mars is at, it really changes the flavor of that Aries. No, that's okay. That's all right. So Mars is at home in Aries. And traditionally it was also at home in Scorpio. That's called its domicile. Whatever sign that is ruled by that planet, that's its domicile or its dignity. I use domicile because it means at home, and that just helps me remember. But it's also in its dignity. It's in its rulership. So like, and probably not, but say he had a Mars in Aries, then his Mars would be at home. It would be in domicile. And that's a very strong Aries placement because Aries energy and Mars energy is very similar. So Mars is very comfortable in Aries and it's able to function the way that it's supposed to. Because Aries is about drive. Aries is about, Mars is about drive. Mars is about getting things done, starting things, enacting your will. And so it goes together with Aries energy. Versus like, I know some Aries risings. I read a chart for a guy that was a Libra Sun, Libra Mercury, Libra this. Hi, Julia. And he had Mars in Libra, but he was an Aries rising. And so like, some people might be like, oh, well, he's got some fire in that chart to override some of this Libra energy. No, because his Mars was in Libra. So it just was even more Libra energy, even though he was an Aries rising. And that's why understanding planet rulerships is so important. His Mars is in Virgo. Okay. So let's go back to this. So for your son, since he's an Aries rising, let's see. Oh my God. Whitney, get it together, girl. Okay. Who's driving this thing? Oh my goodness. So in whole sign, which I don't know, I don't really read in whole sign, but if in whole sign, his Mars would be for sure in 6th house, because 6th house is kind of associated with Virgo if he's an Aries rising. So a Mars in 6th house is going to be, so he might have all of this Aries energy, be very fiery, be able to initiate things, but he is very meticulous and he likes things just so. He's really invested in his daily routines. He relies a lot on those routines in order for him to feel regulated. I think Mars in Virgo I like that Mars placement, but it is very meticulous and it can be prone to overthinking. A lot of times they're engineering types, in my opinion. Right. So that's a good example. So in that Mars, even though he's in Aries, you're like, oh, well, I heard Aries are supposed to be really bullheaded and they're supposed to be really like loud and like yelly and whatever. Okay, but all of his Aries placements, every single one of them is ruled by that Mars in Virgo. So that Mars in Virgo is super duper important in his chart. Because not only is he an Aries rising, he has a bunch of stuff in Aries, and everything in Aries is ruled by that Mars in Virgo. So people get mad because they're like, oh, well, people are more than their sun sign. That's true. That's true. But it's also just fun to make sun sign videos. Daughter is an Aries, Sun, Pisces, Moon, Sag, Rising, Mars, and Gemini. Okay, so let's try to conceptualize that on the wheel. Okay, so for Claire Consultant, her son is her son, S-O-N, son, has an Aries sun and moon and an Aries rising. So this is, his chart is kind of a more natural chart like this. Daughter is an Aries, Sun, Pisces, Moon, Sag rising. So this is kind of hard. I know this is kind of crazy, but let's see. So if your daughter had been born in the morning, her sun would be in Aries in the first house, like right before sunrise. But let's see, she must have been born. Oh, here's afternoon. See, the sun is starting to set. Here's Sagittarius here. Sun's going down. It's at night. Okay, so she's a Sagittarius rising. In whole sign, it would look like this. Okay, and that means that she is a 5th house sun. Does that make sense? See the sun down here? And then that Pisces moon. Let's see. This doesn't line up the way that I want it to, because it's kind of cockeyed. Be like, yeah, she would be a 5th house sun, and then that Pisces moon would be in 4th house. And so that talks a lot about her. Where's Jupiter in her chart? Do you know? So having a Sagittarius rising, the ruler for Sagittarius is Jupiter. And so Jupiter is going to rule her whole chart. And an Aries sun in 5th house, where she has the moon in 4th and has the sun in 5th, I bet she's a very family-oriented person. She might be really works with kids. She might have a lot of affinity for working with children in that case, is what I would probably guess about that chart. Also, 5th house suns can be very creative. And they also, a lot of times, they really enjoy dating and enjoy putting their creative energy into something. They have a lot of creative energy that they need to pour out. Oh. Are you a 5th house sun? Jupiter's in Scorpio. Was he? I can't do it just based off of that, though. Sorry. He's a Pisces, though, huh? Placidus and tropical are not. There's Placidus versus whole sign. Placidus is a house system, and there's tropical versus sidereal astrology. Do you guys want to talk about, I don't know, maybe. Do you guys want to talk about Placidus versus whole sign house, or do you want to talk about tropical versus sidereal astrology? Oh, I don't co-host, sorry. Tropical, Placidus. Let's talk about tropical versus sidereal first, because that is more relevant for the beginning of Aries season. So, let me think of the best way to explain it. And I also have other videos on this in the playlist, okay? So, back when they started doing astrology, so your chart is probably in Placidus and in tropical. That's what I'm saying. So Placidus is a house system, and tropical astrology is like, it's about the ecliptic. Okay? So this outside part of the astrology wheel is the ecliptic, the part that rotates. Okay? Astrology, okay, let me think. The ecliptic is the portion of our sky that the planets pass through, and the portion of our sky that the planets rise and set. So the portion of the sky where the sun can rise and set, where the moon can rise and set, that's also the area where other planets rise and set. Okay? And in order to keep track of our orbit around the sun, they came up with a way to delineate different parts of the ecliptic. If the ecliptic is 360 degrees, which it is, right? It's a circle. Then if we divide it by 30 degrees for each sign, then we can divide the ecliptic 12 ways. Are y'all with me so far? If we have 360 degrees in a wheel for things to rise and set, we can divide that wheel by 30 and get 12 signs, right? And originally what they did was that they picked existing constellations to represent 30-degree increments of this ecliptic, okay? And even though, because this makes a rotation every 24 hours, but if we use something on the backdrop of that ecliptic as it rises and sets, it's going to be easier to keep track of where the planets are at, right? Because they move very slowly through each section of the ecliptic. So like today, the sun is at like 1 degree of Aries, and it will rise and set, go all the way around, but it will move a little bit and be at 2 degrees of Aries by tomorrow. And then it'll be at 3 degrees, and it takes 30 days, about 30 days to get through each sign, right? Are we with me so far? Thank you. Do we understand everything I've said so far? I have not explained anything about tropical versus sidereal yet, but do you understand what I'm talking about? Okay, perfect. So that was back in ancient Greece, okay? Hi, Miriam. Because we have planetary tilt, the original signs, like literally Aries, Pisces, Taurus, Virgo, they have drifted a little bit out of their original 30-degree increments that were designated in this ecliptic, okay? And that's where we get into tropical versus sidereal astrology. The first day of Aries season in tropical astrology is the first day of spring, always. That is this, whatever section of the ecliptic is on the eastern horizon, on the first, on the equinox, that is Aries, okay? That 30-degree section of the ecliptic is Aries. But the sign of Aries is no longer there. The sign of Aries has drifted. If Riri's here, she might be able to tell me how far. I think it's 23 degrees away. So some people, nice. So for Western astrology, most people use tropical astrology. It's based off the Tropic of Cancer, and which is like a latitude, and it's based off of where the sun is at on the equinox, on each equinox, and on each solstice. And so Aries starts spring, Cancer, where the sun is at the beginning, on the solstice, that's the beginning of Cancer. And then Libra initiates fall, and then Capricorn initiates winter on the winter solstice. Okay? That is tropical astrology. Other people, as the constellations have been drifting out of their original locations, other people continue to follow where those constellations are at currently. And that is called sidereal astrology. And I think Vedic astrologers use that as well. And so when people are like, did you know, they're saying it's the first day of Aries season, but did you know that it's actually just the middle of Pisces season? They read in sidereal astrology, okay? They use a sidereal astrology chart. And so that has to do with how we divide up the 30-degree increments of the ecliptic and where we think those are at. Which one is more accurate? I don't know. I use tropical. I've never gotten a reading in sidereal, so I can't say if I think it's accurate or not. I think that A lot of people use sidereal and get accurate information out of it. So that's all I can really say about it. Because astrology is just different ways of organizing information in order to make predictions. It's a system. It's just different systems of organization in order to predict outcomes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about placidus house system. Placidus is a house system. We just talked about tropical versus sidereal astrology, which talks about the divisions in the ecliptic. Okay? Let me show you. Oh my goodness, there. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the divisions of this outside wheel, the 30 degrees of this ecliptic. Okay? I know, right? It took me a long time to figure this out. Now we're going to talk about the difference between dividing up these houses. Okay? Because while the ecliptic rises and sets, these houses are more or less stationary. Okay? It's just talking about a part of the sky from your vantage point. So like 12th house is right above the horizon line. It's the part right above the eastern horizon. And exactly where it stops depends on the house system. Okay? So let's talk about whole sign. Well, let's talk about whole sign first. This chart is kind of an equal sign, I think. Let's talk about placidus first, since we've been talking about placidus. Okay? So in placidus house system, these are all looking very equal. In placidus, if you look at your chart in placidus, you might see, depending on the time of year that you were born, you might see that some houses are like really a lot smaller. Like maybe it looks like this, and then some houses are like really huge. And you're like, why is it like that? Placidus house system bases each house on where the sun will be at every 2 hours. It uses the eastern horizon as the cusp of the first house, uses the ascendant as the cusp of the first house, and then 2 hours after that is the beginning of the 12th house. 2 hours after that is the beginning of the 11th house, okay? Because this is the way that the sun rises, okay? The MC, this angle is the zenith of the sun. This is as high as it gets in the sky. This is where the sun will be at noon, okay? And so sometimes of year, the sun, is like really high in the sky by noon. Sometimes it's still like over here, right? Sometimes it's already past this point, right? So the sizes of the houses really differ in placidus house system. And placidus house system, and for the record, I use placidus house system, but placidus house system starts to break down after, if you're born really, really, really far north or really far south. Like I know a lot of Australian astrologers don't use placidus house system because there's times of year where it doesn't really work because the sun doesn't even really come all the way up, where it doesn't really set, and it really messes up the sizes of these houses. Okay, and so in that case, they might use a different house system. A lot of people, there's been a big resurgence of whole sign house system, which is traditional Hellenistic astrology that uses whole sign house. In whole sign, you have to kind of ignore these. Let me see if I can get a different chart. In whole sign, the houses are set based on the 30 degrees of the ecliptic. Okay? So in whole sign, if your kid is an Aries sun, like let's say Aries is here, this whole first house will be in Aries, okay? But the rising sign, the ascendant, it will float in this house, okay? So it might be like right here or it might be like right there. Okay? Versus like the MC line in the 10th house and the IC line in the 4th. It might be it'll float in the 10th house. Sometimes if you're born really far north or south, you might have that line in a different house, even in whole sign house. But it lines up. The house lines up with the 30 degrees of that sign. Are y'all tracking with this so far? Do we have any questions on what I've talked about so far? You're tracking with it? Anybody else have any questions? These are the two major ones that you'll run into usually. There are other house systems. There's like equal sign house. Thanks, Nicole. There are some house systems that will make the ascendant the cusp of the first house, and the descendant the cusp and it will average out the house. It'll make it equal signs between here and equal signs between here, and I think that's called equal sign house. But also that might be coach. Does anybody know the difference between equal sign house and coach? KOCH. I think a lot of Australian astrologers use coach. But those are house systems. They are different ways of dividing up the sky, but from your vantage point on Earth. Okay, not the ecliptic itself, which rises and sets. So whole is complete houses and placidus overlaps. Yeah, yes. So yeah, that's a good. So like in placidus. Let me get this closer. Sorry. In placidus, hi Asar. In placidus, you might have it like this, right? And this ascendant is in the late degrees of Aries, right? So Aries is your rising, but you might have Taurus placements in this first house, right? Same thing here. This descendant is in Cancer, or not descendant, the IC line is in Cancer, but you may have a lot of Leo placements in this 4th house. So when you have things that overlap like that, that means that you're probably reading in placidus. And it requires a little bit more nuance. And it kind of blends a lot of different concepts together. So if I got the different results between placidus and tropical, placidus and tropical are not two different things. Tropical astrology is about the ecliptic. There's tropical versus sidereal. And then there's placidus versus like whole sign house or coach. So I don't know how to answer your question, because tropical astrology, you would have toggled between tropical versus sidereal, or placidus versus whole sign, or coach, or equal sign house. I use AstroSeek and it's down right now. But I've heard Cafe Astrology is good. Does anybody have another website that they use? I can still use it. I can still use AstroSeek because I've had an account there. But if you don't have an account, you can't use it right now. Neither. It's neither. Astro charts. Thanks, Lori. So for me, that took me a really long time to understand how everything worked on the chart itself, because it was really, really, really confusing and I couldn't find the information anywhere. Does everybody understand what a water sign is and an earth sign, a fire sign? We can talk about that, or we can talk about modalities. We can talk about cardinal versus mutable versus fixed. We can talk about angles, trine, opposition, conjunction. Yes, that's correct. Yes, Nicole. Often. They're very relevant. They're very relevant. I can talk about angular houses, sedent houses, and cadent houses. I don't understand that as well. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, so a lot of people will talk about each sign being associated with a certain house. This is a little bit too close. The houses that are associated with cardinal signs that start new seasons, those are called angular houses. And that is first house, which is the physical body, the self. Fourth house represents the home and the family. It's like your domicile and the foundation that you're kind of built on. The next angular house is the seventh house, which is associated with Libra. And angular house, seventh house is about partnership, about how after you take these two things, how you're able to show up in relation to another person, whether a business partnership or a marriage, but where you're trying to build something together, is seventh house. And then the next angular house is 10th house. And 10th house is your public image, your legacy. If the planet in the house is in a different sign, how do you interpret it? It just depends, Nicole. It just kind of depends. But I interpret it, I'll kind of blend the concepts between the two houses, to be honest. So these are angular houses, and they're very important. Planets that are in angular houses, especially first house, but any of the angular houses or any planet that's conjunct the angle, that's in the rulership of that angle, like if it's in the same sign as the angle itself, they're going to show up really strongly in your chart. Okay? And then I think they're called sedent houses. The sedent houses to me are about, they all kind of have a value theme. So second house is house of value and self-worth. Okay? It's associated with Taurus, which is a fixed sign. Okay? Then the next sedent house is fifth house, which is house of creation. So it's like you have to have this in order to do anything over here, I feel like. So this is personal value. This is when you put your personal value into something. House of creation, either it's born out of you like a child, or it's a creative project that's born out of you, or it's, maybe a romantic connection that's born, where you're pouring energy into something and it starts to take on a life of its own. And then there's eighth house. So second house is personal value, and its opposing is eighth house, which is the value of others. On Nightlight Astrology, they'll call eighth house the blood bank, because it's about exchange. It's about deep exchange. Pouring into another person. It's like karmic contracts. It can represent secrets, represents in terms of money, because these are both kind of financial houses. This is like your money, things that you create, or not create, but like value that you bring to yourself, and this is value that you may get from other people, or that you give to other people. People, you know, if you have a person in your life and they have a lot of planets in your 8th house, there's going to be a lot of exchange themes, deep exchange involved in that relationship. And then the next sedent house is 11th house. So 5th and 11th house are on an axis as well. And this is about giving value to the collective. It's associated with friends and groups, social justice, like Aquarian themes. I feel like 5th house kind of needs recognition. It's associated with Leo. And it's about like someone seeing your value, seeing your worth. Like you're showing it to somebody. And 11th house is more like, it's like you have it and you're able to provide it to the world without necessarily needing anything back. Hey, how are you? Does that make sense? Like Aquarian energy is going to do what's best, and they don't necessarily need recognition. They don't necessarily need connection out of that. They've gone through these, you know, this personal value piece, this trying to show others their personal value piece, exchanging value with others to the point where they're able to just like give that value, give their unique perspective, give their inherent like value to the world, and not necessarily need anything back out of that. Does that make sense to everybody? Is everybody tracking with what I'm talking about? So that's how I see the progression between the sedent houses. I've never been taught that, okay? That's just my opinion. I think that's my personal opinion. So I don't actually know if they teach it like that. If anybody, that's how I look at it. And then is sedent is cadent in the middle, or is sedent in the middle? I don't remember. I might have just said sedent for all of those in their cadent houses. I honestly do not know. Someone should tell me. Like I'm legitimately asking. So I know these are angular, and then I know there's cadent and there's sedent, but I don't remember which one's which. Because honestly, you guys, the sedent came after each angle. It could be. Someone look it up. Let's make sure before we move on. Because I honestly do not remember. That's why this is a beginner astrology page, okay? Okay, perfect. Okay, and then the houses that are associated with mutable signs are cadent houses, okay? And I'm probably like pronouncing that wrong, Aries. Is it succedent or decedent? I don't know. Okay, and then these are cadent houses, okay? So 3rd house is associated with Gemini and network communication. I feel like this is an area, like we take information in here, and we're not really passing any judgment on these things. Succedent, okay. We're like Gemini energy and 3rd house is we're taking stuff in, but we're not necessarily, we don't necessarily have a purpose to that. It's just kind of like being in the know, wanting to be connected to other people. It's the local community. This house is also associated with like study. Okay, and then the next cadent house is 6th house, which is for health and for daily routines. I feel like in the 6th house, we're starting to kind of filter through some of the information that we take in, and some of the water that you swim in terms of your local community, right? Like this, what everything is around you, this information, and you start to be discern a little bit about what's worth, what you are going to take, right? Like what you're going to do, how you're going to implement things in your life, right? On a very day-to-day routines type of level. Like what's relevant and what isn't to you, right? Then ninth house is about, it opposes third, right? And ninth house themes are higher education, religion. This is really what you're going to live by. It's associated with travel and stuff too, but ninth house, like we're just taking information in third house, and in ninth house, it's like, okay, well, how are we going to live on a big picture level? What are we going to live by? What are the values? How are we going to take information in order to determine kind of this big picture stuff of like how am I going to live my life? What do I think is important? Right? And then 12th house is the last cadent house, and it is associated with the collective unconscious. And it's much less structured than these other houses. 12th house information is on a subconscious level, and it's more about like your spirituality and about, I don't know, about an inner knowing. It's intuitive, and it's on the spiritual plane, right? So planets in the 12th house, going from 9th house to 12th house. 9th house can be kind of dogmatic. There's ritual involved here, right? It's ritualistic. It's religion, okay? And there's certain dogmas that you perform, right? And 12th house is not performative. 12th house is that you've taken some of these concepts and deeply taken them inside of yourself on a spiritual level, and you're internalizing them to a point that you're connected to the spiritual plane based on those things, and it provides you access to the collective. That's how I look at those houses. Because 12th house really took me a long time to understand too, because people would say things like, oh, everything above the horizon has to do with other people, and everything below the horizon has to do within yourself. And I'd be like, well, what about 12th house? Because that's like your unconscious mind, and what it is it's the collective. It's Jungian. This is the collective unconscious. It's the spiritual plane. It's where you go. It's where you go when you pray. It's how you act, oh, it's outside of yourself? Yes, it's outside of yourself by going within in order to access the spiritual plane that's all around us. Any questions on that? I might put this whole thing on YouTube or something. I don't ever put anything on YouTube. I'm trying to use this. I have an office space that I'm trying to get situated, and I keep not doing it. So but it has really nice light. So I'm in the office today, even though it's like a big mess. It's not even usable. But I do have my desk in here. So you're welcome. This is how I've conceptualized things, and my understanding of astrology is pretty rudimentary, to be honest. But the way that I learn things is by really learning the basic building blocks first. And that's, so this, learning all this stuff is kind of fresh for me, because I just barely started studying astrology a few years ago. And for me, you have to really understand these basic things before you can start adding on. And you have to learn how to chunk the information together in order for it to make sense. And so some people get really mad about, oh, first house being Aries and second house being Taurus, and first house is angular and Aries is cardinal, right? But I have and then like second house is succedent and Taurus is fixed. But like, how are you supposed to get it all in your brain unless you associate them with one another? Like, literally, how are you going to learn all of it unless you can understand, like, oh, like, it's not the exact same thing. Like, I don't look at an 8th house Venus as the same as, like, a Venus in Scorpio. They're a little different, but the theme, a lot of the themes are going to be kind of the same. There's a lot of overlap between what those two things mean. And you have to, like, learn how to, like... You've always been confused on degrees and that some degrees have more meaning than others. That's a good question. Some people are really, really, really into degree theory. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really follow a lot of degree theory. I don't do a lot of, like, oh, this degree is for Cancer and this degree, like, what the hell-y? I can't do that. And I also, for me, I don't know. I've never found it relevant, I guess. But I will look at things. Do I follow modern or traditional rulership? That's a good question. I do modern rulership. And that's only because I can read that way and I feel like I get good results with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with following the traditional rulerships, though. For me, I feel like I can get accurate results doing modern rulership. Degree theory. For me, yeah, I'll look at degrees I'll look at 0 degrees because that's like a brand new energy for that planet. That planet's just entering that sign. Let me pin this one so that I don't forget. I'm going to finish what I'm talking about first. So, 0 degrees is like a very intense energy for that planet. It's a new energy for that planet. That planet's still learning how to navigate within that sign. And then, 29 degrees I'll look at. 29 degrees is where we're trying to finish up a lesson. We're trying to finish up something. And then I will sometimes look at 22. If somebody because 22 is supposed to be a really critical degree. And if somebody has a lot of 22s in their chart, like we're having a yacht at 22 degrees, or like, I've seen enough with 22 degrees that, some people call it the death degree and whatever. I don't know about all that, but it's supposed to be, tense. And I will look, if there's a lot of 22 degrees in that chart, I will look at it. What's a yod? A yod is a formation in a chart. But let me talk about modern versus traditional rulership. So in traditional astrology, the only planets that were used back in the day, obviously, were planets that can be observed in the night sky. And those only go, the furthest out planet that you can observe from Earth is Saturn. And so it rises at 22 degrees. That's very interesting. So traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, had rulers for each sign, and most signs had to share. So like Aries is ruled by Mars, and traditionally Aries was like the masculine expression of Mars, and then Scorpio was the feminine expression of Mars, and Mars ruled both. And Taurus was the feminine expression of Venus, and Libra was the masculine expression of Venus. And that's still true. They still share. Venus rules Libra and Taurus still. And then Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. That is still the case. Even in modern and in traditional astrology. Mercury rules both of those. And then Cancer is ruled by the moon. And that's always been the case. The moon is a luminary. It's not considered a planet. But it's a luminary and it rules Cancer. And then Leo is ruled by the sun, which is also a luminary. And it just rules Leo. Then we talked about Virgo already. We talked about Libra already. Okay, so in modern astrology, Scorpio, instead of being ruled by Mars, is ruled by Pluto. You know, and that's been pretty recent because we haven't really known about Pluto that long, right? And then Sagittarius in modern and in traditional astrology is ruled by Jupiter. In traditional astrology, Jupiter also rules Pisces. And in modern astrology, it's ruled by Neptune. Right. And Uranus. So, and then Sagittarius, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn in modern and in traditional astrology. And then in traditional astrology, Aquarius was also ruled by Saturn. That's the one that really mixes me up. Like if I'm trying to figure out somebody like Aquarius versus Capricorn, like rising and stuff, that usually really messes me up to have them both ruled by Saturn. It kind of messed me up. But in modern astrology, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. So we have 3 modern planets. Again, the ones that can actually be seen in the sky goes out to Saturn. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not visible in our night sky. We're not able to see them with the naked eye like the other planets. So those ones are modern planets, and some people have assigned them rulerships over different signs. I do use the modern rulerships. I'm open to changing if I find that I can get better information out of using traditional rulerships. I haven't found that yet. Again, it's just different ways of organizing information and getting accurate information out of it. And then planets that are able to be seen in the night sky, as they get closer to the sun and aren't visible with their own light. Yeah, it is, right? As they get, sometimes they're close to the sun, and then if a planet's within like 15 degrees ish of the sun, it starts to not be able to give its own light, and that debilitates it. It's called being under the sun's rays. And then different planets have different thresholds for being combust by the sun, where the sun not only debilitates that planet, but if it's really, really close to that planet, it makes it so that planet can't function correctly. Personally, I look more at that with Mercury and Venus, personally. But technically, any of those can be combust. Technically, the moon can be combust as it loses its light as it gets close to the sun. I kind of tend to look at those other ones more as like the life cycle of that planet. And it becoming... it probably is, right? It probably is. But I kind of look at it more like Saturn at the end of its life cycle. Yeah, I don't necessarily look as much at Mars, but like Jupiter and Saturn, I don't know what it is. I think it's because actually Venus and Mercury get hot as fuck, and when they're close to the sun in the sky, to me it actually burns it up. But planets that don't give light, planets that can't be visible in the night sky, no one considers them to ever be able to get combust. So like your sun is conjunct your Mercury, what does that mean? And the chart ruler is Mercury in Gemini. So if Mercury is very close to the sun, that means that your logical mind is very close to your ego. And that your ego sometimes it can overshadow your ability to think clearly and for you to be able to separate your opinion from a fact. Will I be opening up my chart reading soon? I don't know. Join the wait list. I will absolutely be contacting the people on the wait list before I open up the readings all the way. And so if I get consistent people on the wait list, I might not open up the readings for a long time. How exciting! But yeah, like before I like make an announcement that the chart readings are open, I'm going to contact the people on the wait list. Hi, Maddie. Join the wait list. I'll be contacting people on the wait list before the readings actually open up. But anything right now, it would be in May. We would be looking at May at the very earliest. And anybody on the wait list, I think I'm going to keep it at $45. And then if I don't have, perfect. I'm going to keep it at $45, which is where we closed at. And then after that, I might raise. I'm not sure. I forgot what I was talking about. Were we talking about combust? We were talking about Mercury. Yeah, and then as Mercury is behind the sun, it's dying, kind of like the moon is in its balsamic moon, dark moon cycle. And then as it gets into the very center of the sun, within less than a degree, within I think it's 13 arc minutes, 17 arc minutes, it's considered in the heart of the sun, and that's called cazimi. And so if your Mercury placement is close enough in the heart of the sun like that, then it actually is able to shine through. It's really rare, and it really takes the energy of that planet that's in cazimi with the sun, and elevates it quite a bit for that brief period of time. And then as it passes forward, it's starting its new life cycle, and it's kind of on shaky legs, like a new moon is, until it starts to gain its own light outside of the sun. That's how I look at it. Do I do synastry readings? Yes, no. Yes and no. I don't take money for synastry readings, but if someone purchases several readings from me, like for them and their partner or them and their kids, I'll definitely talk about the synastry or how the charts relate to one another. A full synastry reading is very complex, and it also requires you to maybe look at the composite chart or the Davidson chart, and I'm still learning how to do that, but I do enjoy, I practice. Does that make sense? If I do a reading for people, I'll definitely talk about their relationship with each other, and that's more for my own practice. I don't charge for it. Does that make sense? So if somebody purchases 2 chart readings and then tells me the nature of their relationship, I'll definitely talk about it. And I'll put the charts I'll put the charts on top of each other in synastry. And kind of talk about things to look out for in the relationship, like if there's a bunch of Saturn squares or whatever. Oh, thank you. What else do I need to put on the Astrology 101 playlist, you guys? What else is confusing? I don't have anything about any of the nature of any of the planets. Do I need to put that on there? Tell me the truth. Is that where people are at? Do they need me to talk about that? Guess. I want you to guess. But yeah, what else? I'm trying to present everything in on that playlist in a very sequential way. That no one's guessed Sagittarius in a long time. I have a lot of really, really good friends that are Sagittariuses. All of my oldest friends are Sagittariuses. I am a mutable sign. That's a hint. Sometimes I wish I was a Sagittarius so bad, you guys. They're such a vibe. I could probably put what I was talking about with the fixed, or with the cadent and succedent and whatever planets and what they represent. Okay. Yeah, I guess. I have a lot of Sagittarius friends, though. And my daughter's a Sagittarius, and she is friggin' hilarious, and I friggin' love her. Her daddy's a Sagittarius, too. I am a Pisces. I am a Pisces. I love Sages. I do kind of parent them, though. Like, even my friends that are Sagittarius, I'm their parent. Like, my most recent Sagittarius friend that I made, she is, I used to work with her. Yes. Yes, but my Sagittarius daughter has a Cancer moon. I love Sagittarius. Love more about conjunctions and other aspects of planets relative to one another. And then this person says, can you explain Chiron in the North Node and the South Node? Okay, let's talk about Chiron in that first. And then aligned life, if I forget about yours, ask it again, okay? I'm a Sagittarius, my only child is a Pisces, and he's such a good person. Oh, that's so sweet. Okay, Chiron. Chiron is an asteroid. It has a very irregular orbit, and some astrologers won't use Chiron. I've heard vaguely that they've done studies and stuff about Chiron, and it's not very predictable in terms of like measuring outcomes in astrology. So some people don't use it at all, and say that it doesn't have a lot of influence. Other people will say, like, I've heard some people say like, oh, we should make Chiron the ruler for Virgo, and I don't know about that either, okay? Because I don't know. But anyway, I've always found Chiron to be very relevant in my synastry with people. Chiron's in a very important part of my chart, though. And Chiron is the wounded healer. It moves slowly. It takes almost 50 years to get around the zodiac wheel, and it will retrograde it's erratic, kind of. It retrogrades for kind of a long time, and then it will go. And so it's really variable on where it can be at in a chart. And then, yeah, Chiron represents a point in the chart that you are helping other people heal, and yet there's a wound there that you're not able to heal yourself. And so, in synastry, especially if you have a lot of Chiron synastry with somebody, it's kind of a painful connection. And I always have Chiron synastry with people. Always. My Chiron is in Cancer, and it's opposing my vertex of my chart. And so the sign that Chiron is in and the house that it's in represents a place that you have a wound that is very raw. You live on a Chiron line. Girl, that's rough. I don't know a lot about astrocartography, but get off that Chiron line. That's tough, man. And so for me, a lot of times, having Chiron in Cancer, a lot of people my age have Chiron in Cancer. I have Chiron in Cancer it's in 11th, and then in whole sign it's in 12th. Yeah, my vertex is in Cap, yes. It's in Cap in 5th. So my Chiron talks a lot about not feeling like I belong in a group because I don't feel like I belong in my family, right? And so a lot of the connections that I bring across with my own children and in romantic connections, I end up taking on a role where I am bringing about like family healing, emotional healing around family things. That sucks, Josephine. And yet, like, there's a wound there that I'm never really going to be able to fully heal. And that's what Chiron is about in astrology. And then toward your 50th birthday, you experience the Chiron return. This year, Chiron will be leaving Aries briefly and entering Taurus and staying at 0 degrees of Taurus. So anybody that has a Chiron in the early degrees of Taurus may be starting the Chiron return this year. And it's about a bunch of painful healing. I'm adopted. I've talked a little bit about this before. And I found my biological family during my Saturn return. And for my biological father, it was his Chiron return. And he found out he had a daughter he didn't know about. So that's the kind of thing that might go under, and, you know, I've heard several stories like that for Chiron. Right? And so, like, when people are like, Chiron's not even relevant. Chiron doesn't even represent whoa in astrology. I'm like, well, I can, in my personal experience, I've seen it play out. Yes. I don't know exactly read it and weep, but yes, it will. It's a really irregular orbit. And yeah, it's really oblong, and so it does spend a lot longer in some signs than others. Yes, that's true. And it's been in Aries forever, man. And guess what? I keep live will end in 5 minutes. I was trying to date this year, or in the last few years, and I kept finding these Aries moons that were in my 8th house, and every time when I would find an Aries moon, the transiting Chiron would be conjunct his moon. Are you shitting me? Is this a joke? Are you joking me? So, like, I would look it up, and then it would be like, oh, like, when I was talking to him, Chiron was conjunct his moon. He has mommy issues. I'm fixing his mommy issues. Oh, your Chiron is in strong opposite. So you've been doing your Chiron return, Josephine. You've been doing it if it's in Aries. Is it on the 7th house side, or is it on the 6th house side? And let me set this up where we can talk about. Ooh, I ripped it. Ooh, yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Let me tape this onto a thing, and we will talk about angles and stuff. I think it does too. You keep encountering men in Pluto transits. You have Pluto conjunct Venus in 1st house. Yeah, exactly. It's just really interesting to see that. Chiron is in Aries, conjunct my Mars in Aries, 11th house. You let go of so many friends. That's tough, Kimberlyn. That's really tough. Let me set this up. I gotta find some markers. I've given this lesson a couple of times, but I think I get a little bit better each time, so. Let's see here. This is kind of getting wonky because I've taped it a bunch, but that's fine. Here, you guys look at this for a second, and I need to go get a couple of markers, and I'll be right back. Do I have a straight edge? So there are several major angles in astrology, and a lot of the major ones have a planet associated with them. They talk about that on Nightlight Astrology sometime, but I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. I think a sextile is of the nature of Venus, is what I've heard, and then a trine is of the nature of Jupiter. And I know that in traditional astrology, they didn't really consider a conjunction a traditional aspect. They considered it like a merging of energies. So that's another way to look at it. It's not necessarily like they talk to one another. It's like they are one another, you know, or there's like a... I listened to a really good episode about these. He talked about there being a bodily union in conjunction, which was interesting to me. Okay. I'm back. Michael, I left for just a second. Okay, let's see if I can do this here. So we interested in talking about aspects today? That's what I was going to do next. Y'all with me still? Yeah, Chiron return in 7th house. That's a lot, especially if you live on a Chiron line, Josephine. Okay, perfect. Okay, so you can't really see that good on this one because I am very analog. But before, in the past, I put... So we're talking about the sun in the very early degrees of Aries, like it is today. That's why I was like, oh, I should go live today and talk about this, because I usually talk about this as if we're in the first part of Aries season. So on this chart, as an example, we have the sun in the early degrees of Aries, okay? And this is not where anything is at currently, okay? Except for this one. The other ones I kind of just put on here as an example. So we've got the sun in Aries, and on this chart, we've got Mercury in Aries also, okay? And you can see I've made a little bracket here. These are called, that's a conjunction. When Chiron returns to the 7th, do relationships fail? They can. I don't do astrocartography, so I don't know. I feel like I looked it up once and most of my lines were in the ocean, and I was like, okay, whatever, losers. But we were talking about Mercury, and Mercury can only be up to 23 degrees. Wait. Yeah. Is that right? I made a video about this. Mercury can't even be a whole 30 degrees away from the sun. Okay, I think it can be about 23 degrees away. And so it's because its orbit with the sun is only 88 Earth days. Okay, so it stays really close to the sun. And so it's often conjunct with the sun. If it's less than 15 degrees away from the sun, it's under the sun's rays and it's considered debilitated. If it's close, like within 7 degrees, it's considered combust. Right? But this is considered a conjunction. When things are conjunct to the sun, a lot of times they'll talk about how the sun's light and how the sun represents the ego, and they'll talk about how it debilitates the planet because it can't be seen with its own light in conjunctions to the sun. Okay, and the planets that are most often conjunct to the sun are Mercury and Venus. I've got Venus up here. I don't know if you can see it. Mercury and Venus are close. Mercury makes its orbit every 88 days, and I feel like Venus makes its orbit in like 200 and some days, maybe 266. So it doesn't go retrograde as often. That's why Mercury goes retrograde so often, is because it's making a very small orbit around this sun compared to our 365-day orbit. I'm half finished and my sun line's in Finland, so I'll be moving there. That'll be good. I'd like to go to Finland. That would rock my ass off. I'd love that. So Venus can be up to, it's 40 some degrees away from the sun. So Venus can be, if the sun is at 1 degree of Aries, it could be like in the late degrees of Aquarius. It could be in Pisces. It could be in Aries, or it could be in the early degrees of Taurus. Okay? Because it can only be within like 40 some degrees of the sun. Are we tracking with this so far? This isn't quite what I said I was talking about, but we're going to talk about this with conjunctions first. when a planet is conjunct with another planet rather than the sun, there's more of a merging of energies. Sometimes, and then it really depends on, and even when a planet is combust, it really depends on what sign. Like if the planet is strong in that sign, like it's different than if it's not. So like, I don't know, because the sun's exalted in Aries, but let's see, like say the sun was in Gemini, and then Mercury was in Gemini and it combusts, it's going to be a little bit different because that's a stronger Mercury placement than, say, if the sun was in Aries and the Mercury was in Aries, right? Yes, Mercury will always be close to your sun sign. Mercury will be within 20 some degrees of the sun. So it'll in this chart, it could be in Aries or it could be in Pisces. And as the sun moved to the later degrees of Aries, Mercury could be in Taurus. It can be like a sign behind or a sign ahead, but it has to be within 20 some degrees. Is this making sense? Okay, let's talk about trine next. I did this wrong on this. Damn it. Whitney. Okay, so we're going to X that one out. I don't want to do this. Oh, that doesn't even do nothing. Oh my Christ. Okay. Because this is in the early degrees of Leo. And this Saturn should be at the early degrees of okay. Okay, so if we have the sun at the early degrees of Aries, and then in this chart, you can't really see, but I have Mars down here at the very early degrees of Leo. Yes. Oh, these are too little. Hold on. So if the sun is at the early degrees of Aries, and we had a planet at the early degrees of Leo, those are in the same element, right? Those are both in fire signs. And if it was at the early degrees of both, then by degrees, they would also make an aspect with one another. And if they're in the same sign, that's a 120 degree aspect. How I look at that is like 30, 60, 90, 120. That's how I kind of do that. And it would be a harmonious aspect, which I decided we would do in green. Okay, like that. On Astroseek, they do harmonious aspects in blue. But it would look like that, and that's a trine. And then you're like, why the moly is that even called a trine? That looks like a friggin' line of nothing, right? Like, how am I going to remember that that's a trine? And it becomes a lot more clear. Oh, I think I put the moon here in Sagittarius when I realized that this Saturn was in the wrong spot. Okay, so let's say on this chart the moon is in Sagittarius, okay? No, the degrees do not have to be exact. Some astrologers will count a trine just if they're in the same element. For me, I will count it as within orb. So like if the sun is at 0 degrees, say that another planet was at like up to 5 degrees of Leo, I would count it. And for me personally, I will also count it if it's in the late degrees of Cancer. It's not as strong. Like it's not as strong, but a lot of times it is relevant and I will count it. Or like for me, I have an out of sign square in my chart between my moon and my Mars. And I can tell that's a big part of my chart. I can tell you that much right now because I have an anger issue. So, okay, but if we're talking about trines, let's say we had the moon at the very early degrees of Sagittarius, okay? And once you have 3 planets, let's see. That's kind of hard because, so let's say we had this at the early degrees of that. Be like this. Oh my God, I moved it. Okay? And then if it's at the early degrees of Sagittarius, it will also talk to this Mars. It's at the early degrees of Leo, right? Like this. Once you have 3 of them, you can see pretty clearly why it's called a trine, right? Because it's an equilateral, it makes an equilateral triangle. So the degrees around the outside of each angle is 120. Okay? Are we tracking with this? So, you know, planets that are in the same element at similar degrees, they trine one another. For me personally, if I see this in a chart, I'm calling this a grand fire trine. If one of the planets is out of signs, like it's in, like, say this Mars was in the late degrees of Cancer instead of in Leo, I'm not calling it a grand fire trine. I'm not calling it a grand trine at all, even though it looks like one. That's how I do. Right? It is crazy. And a trine is a harmonious aspect. Planets that are the same element, especially, they get along with one another and they help each other. They're similar. They understand one another. Are we tracking with this? Is this valuable? Do we want to talk about an opposition or a square or something? Yes, please. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about, what should we talk about next? Let's talk about a sextile next. A sextile is also a harmonious aspect. In this chart, you can't see nothing because I have it too close. Okay. In this chart, we have Mars down here. You can kind of see in the early degrees of Leo. And then I put Pluto at the very early degrees of Libra in this chart, okay? So, and these are 60 degrees from one another. The whole sign of Leo is 30 degrees, and then the whole sign of Virgo is another 30 degrees. That's 60 degrees. And then we have Pluto at the very early degrees of Libra. And that's called a sextile because it is 60 degrees from one another, okay? So we're here. Más o menos. It's a harmonious aspect as well. Sextile, okay? That's a harmonious aspect. When two signs, or when two planets are in the same modality, they make harsh aspects with one another. And in this chart, we've got the sun in early Aries, and then we have Pluto in the early degrees of Libra. Okay? And they make an opposition. That's a tense aspect between those, okay? So we're going to do that one in red. Because red means tense. And on most websites, it will be in red as well. So if we did this early degrees, more or less like this. So you might see it. And if you see on a chart that a line is especially dark, it's an exact aspect, okay? But really, they usually can be within 5 degrees of one another. With the sun, a lot of people will take a conjunction or whatever up to 7 degrees. Does a harmonious aspect always mean it's positive? It means that those two get along with one another. And whether they're getting up to trouble in your chart or whether they're helping you out in the chart kind of depends, right? So, but yeah, if the sun makes an opposition with the Pluto, it's going to look like this. That's a 180 degree angle, okay? Like that. Then, oh, this Saturn was actually in Capricorn, which is not possible, but whatever. Okay. then this Saturn, I have Saturn here at the top of the chart in the early degrees of Capricorn, which technically is not possible, okay? If you have a Pluto in Libra, I don't think you can have a Saturn in Capricorn. But that's neither here nor there. This is just for funsies, okay? That Aries and Capricorn and Libra and Cancer are all cardinal signs, which we've already talked about, right? Aries starts spring, Cancer starts summer, Libra starts fall, and Capricorn starts winter, okay? In tropical astrology, that's what they're doing, okay? So, but those energies can clash with one another, okay? So if we have this Saturn at the very early degrees of Capricorn and a Sun at the early degrees of Aries, they're going to make a square. That's a 90-degree angle, okay? Let's see here. That's a square. And then that Saturn will also square the Pluto, right? And that would be a T-square, okay? If you've ever heard of a T-square, it looks like this in the chart. And say we had a planet in the early degrees of Cancer, which I do not on this chart. But let's say we had one. Let's say we had a planet here in the early degrees of Cancer. It would look like this. These are kind of rare to have a big old square like that, but you can see why it's called a square if you have 4 of them, right? Then it's what this would be called, since they're all in cardinal signs, this would be a cardinal grand square. Okay? This is a cardinal grand square. If you didn't have the 4th planet, it would just be a cardinal T-square. Okay? And then we would have a fire trine, grand fire trine, if we had 3 like that. Okay, so that is the conjunction, the opposition, the square, the trine, and the sextile here. Somebody asked what a yod was, and we can show with you on this chart. So a yod is a chart formation when you have 2 planets that sextile like this. And then they make a 150-degree angle with another planet. So with this, you'd go 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. So in the early degrees of Pisces. And then from here, so we have Venus in Pisces on this chart. And say, then we've got 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, the early degrees of Leo. Okay, so these 2 sextile each other. And they both make what's called an inconjunct or a quincunx. I don't like to say that one. I say inconjunct because what the fuck? But those energies don't understand one another. A 150-degree angle is kind of a harsh angle. And it's called the finger of God, the yod. So if we have that there, we do it like this. For me, I will only look at this 150-degree angle if it is in a yod, if it has 2. And for a yod, the degrees have to be, it has to be very close. It needs to be like within 2 degrees or so of each other. So these 2 planets are pointing at this Venus. Okay? David, get out of here. David, you jerk. So that's talking about needing to learn a very valuable lesson around this Pisces Venus. that these two planets are going to have a hard time understanding because they don't really share any energy with Pisces, because they're not. Oh, someone, all right. David reported my live for bullying. Does anybody have any questions? Ah! Anybody here? I think that I will post this live someplace in its entirety. Probably over on the other place, the other platform. 2 restrictions. Rude. Thank you, Nicole. Do you have any other questions? I think I'm going to jump off here in just a minute, especially because this jerk restricted my live. But if you have any other questions before I go, I'm happy to answer them. I low-key have readings I should be doing. You're welcome, Miss Lori. Do you have any questions before I go? Okay, no worries, no worries. Do I think Mars is significant? Of course. Of course. Every planet is significant. One thing we didn't mention was unaspected planets. Sometimes a planet is in a chart and it doesn't make any strong aspects with anything. When a planet doesn't make any strong aspects with anything, it is a wild card in the chart. Oh no, Mars is significant, for sure. So when a planet is unaspected, a lot of times it gets lit up in transit, and it can be a real wild card in a chart. I've seen charts where Mars was unaspected in the chart, and sometimes it's hard to integrate Mars into the rest of the personality. An unaspected planet sometimes is banished from the rest of the personality, or if it's in Aries, for example, with Mars, or Capricorn, a place that it's strong, it's going to not necessarily get along with the rest of the personality, but it's going to come out strong because it doesn't have anything else it really talks to. It's going to be plowing through your interactions and stuff. And so unaspected planets are always really interesting to interpret for. Yeah, I think I've had enough fun for one day. Thank you, Gatormater. And I'll talk to y'all again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Adios.